Hi, my name is Sam Johnson and I am a voice teacher. Today I will be reacting to and analyzing Billie Eilish, No Time to Die at the BRIT Awards. Now, this is a song that I have seen requested a few times, and I haven't seen the performance yet, but I have listened to the recorded one twice while it's been like on a TV while I'm playing board games and is at like half volume. So that's my experience with the song. I always think it's interesting how different composers include the kind of Bond themes in their music. And so far, I mean, it's at the very beginning of the song, and Phineas is already referencing that, which is cool. It's a really fun thing to be able to compose for a huge James Bond movie, and I'm sure that was an amazing feeling. And from what I know of the song so far, from what I've heard, it does seem to really capture that James Bond anthem feel.
I should have known.
Starts on the D.
I'd leave alone. Just goes to show that the blood you bleed is just the blood you owe.
Good. Then down to the F sharp. So she started on the D and found a resonance strategy that was fairly clear. It wasn't like ultra breathy on the D, actually. It was ultra quiet, but it wasn't ultra breathy. Then when she started going down to the lower note, the lowest note she went was the F sharp. She didn't really let it keep the same amount of chord resistance as she was coming back down, and she was keeping a similar resonance strategy as she was doing on the D, so it was almost like pulling what worked well on the D down. But because the D was like a pretty connected sound, it wasn't completely flipped into falsetto, she might have been feeling it in her head because of how light it was and how quiet it was, but it still had a little bit of the vocal folds coming together rather than just being completely the ligament of the vocal apparatus. So when she went down to that F sharp, it started sounding a little bit breathier. She could have supported it. I'm sure she could get like a really full sound down there if she really worked at it and wanted to, but it's 100% not her style. Except for maybe on that like, don't you know?
But I saw you there. Too much to bear. You were my life, but life is far away from fair.
The real question is how much of her power comes from these fingernails? And that's a question that I think everyone needs to ask themselves, is how much of your power comes from your fingernails? I'm not a professional in that, but it feels like a fair amount of her power comes from her fingernails.
Was I stupid to love you? Was I reckless to help? Was it obvious to everybody else
Fun little harmonies.
that I'd fallen for? You were never on my side.
It's really difficult to sing super quiet and on the voice. And I think that most of the time she does. She doesn't sing completely flipped. Her vocal folds are staying together. That's what I mean by on the voice. It's not completely letting go into falsetto. And she always sounds like she could start leaning into that sound, but she almost never does start leaning into the sound. It's like she's walking this line of how quiet can I sing it while still having a little bit of buzz going on. And sometimes we get a little bit of the breathy sound. I think a lot of times we get a little bit of the breathy sound, but to me, that's not the fundamental sound. The fundamental sound is still on the voice, and then it's colored by that. But it's such a small dynamic range between the two Well, actually, I'm not sure. Like, if we make the smallest she can sing while still being on The Voice, that's almost like the loudest that she sings. She goes a little bit louder, but it's not significant most of the time. I know in this song that, like, she will for a little bit. But that's one end of this range of how loud she's able to go. And then she goes to almost nothingness. So it's whatever the distance between these, that's her total dynamic range. And it's good to have as large of a dynamic range available to you as you're able to sound good and maintain the sort of overall aesthetic that you want for the genre. So for what genre she's doing, like, she doesn't need to sing louder most of the time to make it work. But I feel like one of the reasons people are responding to the song is she does sing a little bit louder for a moment, and it just opens up all of this other dynamic space that can tell stories in a slightly different way than I feel like if she's just spending it, on this almost nothing to a little bit kind of range. But it takes a lot of skill to be able to paint such a cool picture while staying in constraints. And I think it's actually a really cool exercise for people to go through of trying to make really good art while being limited in the colors that you're using. So with her, like, the colors that she's using, at least with dynamics, they're all really quiet, but she's still able to paint a really, really good picture with it, where a lot of people, like, might have bigger ranges, both like actual notes that you're able to do, but also dynamic ranges, and it always seems to come flat. And that's because, like, it's not simply having the tools available that makes you able to perform it. It's being able to use that tool to communicate effectively, which I think that Billie does a really good job of. And I feel like people respond to her super well, so I must not be the only one who thinks she does a good job at that.
Fool me once, fool me twice, higher than paradise. Now you'll never see me cry. There's just no time to die.
With that one, for most of it, it did sound like she was in that flipped kind of coordination rather than singing on The Voice. Fool me once, fool me twice, it's kind of all stuck up in this place. And it's gorgeous. It sounds really, really lovely. And then when she comes down a little bit, when she starts up there and then comes down on that first line, it sounds like she's holding on to a little bit of that feeling, which makes it kind of die out at the end of it, which, again, for the terms of that whole phrase, makes a lot of sense because it needs to have movement through the phrase. If you start the phrase at one dynamic level and you hold that all the way through, it's usually pretty boring. We need to go somewhere with it. With her, a lot of times, at least on this song, she's going quiet at the end of the phrases, but crescendoing would also be a different way to do that. Either way is valid. It just depends on what you're actually trying to speak with it. But then on like the second or third phrase that she did in that last section, it did sound like she suddenly latched on. She started holding on a little bit. It almost resulted in like a teeny bit of tension, but because it was so quiet, it didn't really hit me wrong. But I think that it could be argued that that is like a two-voicey type thing. You hear the flip voice and then you hear modal voice. But even when she went to the modal voice, like, she was trying to make it so quiet that it wasn't such a drastic jump in colors in like one phrase after another. And to me, that makes it easier to listen to. Where if it was doing the really soft one like she did at the beginning, and then it suddenly was loud and it was really, really vibrant, that would be a totally different way of painting it. And because this phrase is so quiet and she doesn't want that, like, you have to ask for it to be really quiet like that. For the terms of just learning how to sing, I think if you can start with that by finding your falsetto stuff, finding your really light stuff, and then try to blend that down until you start feeling it in your chest without it having like a massive jump in color, that's a good way to start blending those two voices together. Even though at the beginning it might still feel like there's a big jump that happens, the more that you can minimize those differences, I feel makes it easier to get it seamless eventually. I love slides, and so it's cool to hear when people are able to use slides creatively in their actual songs. From vocal technique side and from learning how to sing side, I think slides are amazing because it lets your vocal folds learn how to stretch out without kind of jumping to different lengths based on the pitch. So if I was just going like it just has to kind of jump to that. It doesn't just jump because it does move through all of that space, but it's more often that the top note is going to have a different level of resistance than the bottom note has, where if you kind of slide through all of that space, I'm going to do it the octave under. Doing that, it lets your vocal folds gently stretch while maintaining an even amount of air underneath it, so you get used to what it feels like to have even airflow. It also lets you know what it feels like to resist that similar level while moving through a bunch of different pitches. So even though the vocal folds are stretching and the vocal folds are thinning out, it's resisting the air at a fairly similar rate, which makes it sound like it's buzzing at a similar level all the way through that slide. So I think that that's a really good way to start out learning how to sing and exploring your voice. And I also just think it like benefits a lot of singers when they're able to think about having little slides in their music. So she slowed it down for an effect, but I do think honestly that when you're singing pretty much anything, if you can think about having a slide in there, it makes it better almost always. It's just then you want to speed it up so fast that the slide becomes pretty much imperceptible to your audience, because it would then turn into this effect every time. And we don't always want the effect, but we do want that really balanced registration and ability to hold on to similar amounts of resistance as you move through different notes and different ranges, because that makes the voice sound the same, rather than like if you completely let go of that resistance, that's where it turns into a flip where it starts sounding more like falsetto at the top, which a lot of times people want, but I feel like more often people are more concerned with how do I sound big and full as I'm singing these loud notes or these high notes when the only way it feels like I can do it is by flipping. And so the slide into it, I think, is a good way to kind of work through that.
You were never on my side. Fool me like
Okay, that was an A, and it was loudish, but it didn't sound like she flipped between two voices when she went to the side. It sounded like it was connected to the stuff that she usually does, which I think is a evidence point in favor of what I've been saying of, no, she is singing on the voice. It's not very loud. It's not very much pressure underneath it, but she just leaned into that same sound that she's pretty used to, that she uses for most of her stuff, when she went a little bit louder on that A.
fool me twice. I died in paradise. Now you never see me cry. There's just no time to die.
I would just, like, if I was working with her, I would just want to make sure that her jaw is working as efficiently as it can. Like, I do see a little bit of kind of pulling forward, and maybe it's completely fine, but, you know, why do it with that tension if you could also do it without having tension? And yes, like, simply by going forward, you start introducing a little more tension in your jaw, in your masseter, rather than if you were just letting it kind of fall down, this feeling. So if we think of this as a hinge, as it is, you can do it as an experiment on yourself by just putting your hands here and then bite down, squeeze your teeth together, and you should feel this muscle kind of get bigger right here. So once you find where that place is, you just imagine that that's the hinge, and then let the chin hinge back using that. So this doesn't need to move. If this starts moving forward, that's where that introduction of extra tension kind of comes into play. But if it just falls down, that's a very loose movement. And even when she's singing these soft things, like if she was singing louder with her jaw a little bit more forward, it would start becoming more obvious if it was a problem. When she's singing it soft, it might not be an obvious problem, or it might not be a problem at all, honestly. But like, again, why not? If you can just minimize the effort and minimize the extra weird movements and still get the same effect, why not do that? It will just make you more and more consistent throughout your career.
No time to die.
Good.
No time to die.
Cool. On the A, she started on that A, and then she found that placement, but the A sounded fairly similar to how she approached the A earlier, honestly. So it's like that first time that she goes toward the A a few measures before, that's her kind of testing the waters, knowing what it feels like, but not like completely getting loud and committing to it. But now she knows, okay, that's what it feels like to have a little bit more pressure. And this next time, she was able to open the mouth. And she started on the ah and then slid into the I. So doing that little bit of slide, it tends to make you hold on a little bit more to what note just happened. So, for example, like if I was singing really low and sliding up to a higher note, then the higher note would generally maintain a little bit of the closure that was happening on the bottom one. And that can be a good thing if we're wanting the top note to be a little bit more intense, or it could be a bad thing if the top note tends to become squeezed and pressed and yelly. So like doing this, is going to hold on to a little bit of that feeling from the bottom when I get to the top note, where if I start from the top and go bottom, it would tend to hold on to a little bit more of how I started. So more of a yeah, which in my perception of it, the way starting from the top down feels a little bit less strained. But for what she's trying to do, because she's starting on that A that's in a really good place, if she wants that B to start sounding really, really intense, because B isn't like a super high note, it's really not that high of a note. And especially for like really high voice types, sometimes when you're trying to sing a B, it ends up not sounding very heavy at all, not very thick, not as powerful as you might want, because it's not like in that glory note area for a lot of high voices. So if you start with that A and kind of overcompress the A slightly and then pull that up, they're so close together that like the vowel adjustment isn't huge, and she's obviously able to do it quite well. It just makes the B start sounding a little bit more beefy. The die, it holds on to a little bit of that. And in my voice, like that's way higher in my range than it is in her range when she does it. So we sound different. We're different people. All of that is true. And for me, when I do that, I feel a massive kind of turning over happen between the A and the B. But with her, it seems like the sensation might feel fairly similar between those two places. Anyway, that was an over-analysis of the first time I've ever heard Billie Eilish do anything that feels or could ever be associated with the word belt. And I think that she did it quite well, but keep going, girl. Like, you could sing way higher, and that will just keep giving more and more colors available to you. But, like, proof, she can do these things. She's just choosing not to most of the time.
There's just no time today.
And then that chord. Yeah, she killed it. I mean, she sounds really good on that. Most of the song, I think, is in that very familiar, comfortable place for her. And it was mostly on Phineas to kind of change the orchestration and the production and all of the songwriting of it to make it sound James Bondy. Because, like, vocally, I don't think that she did anything except for that one belty note that was like, yeah, that's Bond theme song. Because that that seems to be something that carries over through most of the Bond songs that I know of, is like, yeah, they like that belty sound at some point. And so it was really cool that Billie was able to do that and kind of fit some of the structure that is expected from the song, while for most of it staying completely true to herself and making that part not feel inauthentic. It sounded like it was just an extension of the rest of the things that she was doing quite well. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below. Those things help me out a lot. If you're interested in signing up for a lesson with me, go to my website, vocalese.net. And if you want to talk with other people about learning how to sing and about being nice to people in general, go check out my Discord. A link is below. And do it, because it is a really cool place. Thank you.